The food court at Pinewood Mall buzzed with the usual weekend crowd. Families huddled around plastic tables. Teenagers lounged in groups and tired shoppers rested their feet. Among them sat Thomas Miller, a 42-year-old accountant, picking at his Chinese food while his wife, Lisa, and their teenage daughter, Penny, compared their morning purchases. Thomas wasn't feeling particularly hungry despite skipping breakfast. A dull headache had been bothering him since he woke up, but he hadn't mentioned it to Lisa. She'd been looking forward to the shopping trip all week, and he didn't want to spoil it with complaints about what was probably just lack of sleep. "Dad, you're not eating," Penny pointed out, reaching over to steal an egg roll from his plate. "Are you saving room for that ice cream place you like?" Thomas smiled and pushed his plate toward her. "Go ahead, finish it. I might grab something later." Lisa glanced up from the sweater she was examining. "You feeling okay, honey? You've been quiet today." "Just tired," Thomas said with a shrug. "Year-end tax season's kicking my butt." This wasn't entirely true. For the past few weeks, Thomas had been experiencing strange episodes of fatigue that came and went without warning. Sometimes he'd get dizzy standing up too quickly, and twice he'd found himself momentarily confused about where he was driving. But each time the feeling passed quickly, and life went on. Across the food court, Miguel Ramirez, an off-duty nurse, was enjoying a rare Saturday off with his 8-year-old son, Diego. He noticed the tall man with graying temples at his hairline 3 tables away. Something about the man's complexion caught Miguel's professional attention, a slight grayish tinge that didn't look right. Back at Thomas's table, Lisa stood up. "I'm going to check that shoe sale before we leave. 20 minutes tops." "Take your time," Thomas said, rubbing his temple. "Penny and I will hang out here." Penny was scrolling through her phone, half listening. "Can we stop by the electronics store after?" "My headphones are starting to cut out." Thomas nodded, then suddenly felt a strange tingling sensation spreading across his chest. He took a deep breath, but it felt like not enough air was getting in. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. "Dad?" Penny looked up, her expression changing from boredom to concern. "You look really pale." Thomas tried to answer but found he couldn't form words. The food court light seemed to grow brighter, then dimmer. He gripped the edge of the table as the room began to tilt. "Dad!" Penny's voice sounded far away now. "What's wrong?" Thomas felt his body slide sideways off the chair. The last thing he saw was the ceiling tiles of the food court spinning above him, and the terrified face of his daughter moving into view. Miguel Ramirez was already moving before Thomas hit the floor. He'd seen the man's expression change, watched him grip the table, and recognized the signs of someone in serious distress. "I'm a nurse," Miguel announced, kneeling beside Thomas as a crowd began to gather. "Give him some space, please." Penny stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth. "What's happening to my dad?" she whispered. Miguel checked for a pulse, finding it weak and irregular. Thomas's breathing was shallow and his skin had taken on a bluish tint. "Someone call 911. Miguel shouted, then turned to Penny. "Where's your mom?" "Shoe store," Penny managed, pointing with a shaking hand. A mall security guard pushed through the gathering crowd. "Paramedics are on their way." "What's happening?" "Possible cardiac event," Miguel said, loosening Thomas's collar. "We need a defibrillator, if there's one available." The security guard spoke into his radio while Miguel began chest compressions when Thomas's breathing stopped entirely. "Someone find his wife," the guard said. "She's at the shoe store." Within minutes, Lisa came running through the food court, her shopping bags forgotten somewhere behind her. "Thomas," she screamed, trying to push through the circle of onlookers. The security guard gently held her back as Miguel continued CPR. "Please let the nurse work, ma'am," the guard said softly. "Help is coming." Lisa pulled Penny close, both of them watching in horror as Miguel worked tirelessly to revive Thomas. Mall patrons stood in shocked silence, parents turning their children away from the scene, teenagers recording with their phones until older adults told them to stop. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes after Thomas collapsed. They moved with practiced efficiency, taking over from Miguel, attaching monitoring equipment and administering medications. Their expressions remained professional, but the tight lines around their eyes told a different story. "Is he going to be okay?" Lisa asked, her voice small and frightened. One paramedic looked up briefly. "We're doing everything we can, ma'am." For 23 minutes, the emergency responders worked on Thomas Miller in the Pinewood Mall food court. They used the defibrillator 3 times, They administered 2 rounds of epinephrine. They tried every protocol in their training, but Thomas never regained consciousness. At 2:17 p.m., the lead paramedic looked at his watch and called it. Time of death 14:17. Lisa's legs gave out. The security guard caught her before she hit the floor. Penny stood completely still as if movement might make the nightmare real. Miguel Ramirez, who had tried so hard to save a stranger, bowed his head and stepped back to give the family space. Mall management quickly brought the family to a private office, away from the eyes of curious shoppers. A grief counselor who happened to be shopping that day volunteered to stay with them. The food court was temporarily closed as police took statements and gathered information. By evening, Thomas Miller's body had been transported to the county medical examiner's office. Dr. Helen Wu, the medical examiner on duty, noted the case as a presumed cardiac arrest in a man with no known prior heart conditions. She scheduled the autopsy for Monday morning. Back at their suburban home that night, Lisa sat at the kitchen table surrounded by neighbors who had brought food no one would eat. Her sister had driven 3 hours to be with them. Penny had locked herself in her room, emerging only once to ask if someone had fed their dog Cooper. "It doesn't make sense," Lisa told her sister in a hollow voice. "He just had a checkup last month. The doctor said everything looked good. His cholesterol was a little high, but nothing dangerous." Her sister squeezed her hand. Sometimes these things just happen with no warning. But that wasn't entirely true. As Lisa moved through the fog of that first terrible night, memories began to surface. Thomas complaining about headaches. Thomas napping on weekends, something he never used to do. Thomas getting lost driving to the grocery store he'd been to hundreds of times. "He wasn't himself lately," Lisa whispered. "I should have made him see the doctor again." Across town, Miguel Ramirez tucked his son into bed. Diego had been quiet since witnessing the tragedy at the mall. "Did you try your very best to save that man, Dad?" Diego asked. Miguel nodded. "I did everything I could. Sometimes even our best isn't enough." Diego thought about this. "But you still tried. That's what matters, right?" "That's right," Miguel said, though his heart felt heavy. In his 10 years of nursing, he'd seen death before, but something about Thomas Miller's case troubled him. The man had shown subtle signs of distress before collapsing, signs that didn't quite match the typical presentation of a sudden heart attack. Meanwhile, at the county medical center, Dr. Wu reviewed Thomas Miller's limited medical records that had been faxed over from his primary care physician. His recent physical had indeed shown largely normal results: slightly elevated blood pressure, slightly elevated cholesterol, but nothing that explained a sudden cardiac arrest in a 42-year-old man. She made notes for the morning's examination. Standard protocol would be followed, but something told her to look deeper. 20 years as a medical examiner had given her an instinct for cases that might hold surprises. The next morning, as Sunday dawned, the Miller house was quiet except for the occasional ringing phone, as news spread through their circle of friends and family. Lisa moved mechanically through the motions of feeding the dog and making coffee no one would drink. Penny hadn't come out of her room yet. Lisa sat at the kitchen table, staring at Thomas's coffee mug still sitting in the dish drainer from Friday morning. Just yesterday, they had been a normal family heading to the mall for a day of shopping. Now she was a widow, her daughter half-orphaned, and no one could tell her why. At the medical examiner's office, Dr. Wu prepared for a day of work, unaware that the autopsy she would perform the next morning would reveal something so unexpected that it would change medical understanding and potentially save countless lives, but that discovery was still hours away. For now, a family grieved, a nurse questioned, and a community wondered how someone could be laughing one minute and gone the next. Monday morning arrived with a gray drizzle that matched the mood at the county medical center. Dr. Helen Wu arrived early, reviewing her notes on Thomas Miller's case once more before beginning the autopsy. Something about this case had kept her awake the night before. A healthy man in his early 40s with no history of heart problems dropping dead in a shopping mall didn't sit right with her. "Morning, Doctor," said Ray, her assistant, as he prepared the examination room. "Rough weekend?" "Puzzling one," Dr. Wu replied, pulling her hair back into a tight bun. "Our mall case is bothering me." Ray nodded. After 15 years assisting Dr. Wu, he knew when something had caught her professional curiosity. "The family's been calling. Wife wants answers before the funeral home takes him." "Can't blame her," Dr. Wu said softly. Let's find those answers. Across town, Lisa Miller sat at her kitchen table surrounded by sympathy cards and casserole dishes brought by well-meaning neighbors. Her sister Beth had taken over answering the phone and managing the steady stream of visitors, giving Lisa moments of much-needed quiet. Mom? Penny stood in the doorway, eyes red-rimmed from crying. She hadn't changed clothes since Saturday. When will they tell us what happened to Dad? Lisa opened her arms and Penny collapsed into them. The doctor said they're doing the autopsy this morning. We should know something by afternoon. What if they don't find anything? Penny whispered. What if it just happened for no reason? Lisa stroked her daughter's hair. There's always a reason, honey. We just might not understand it yet. Back at the medical center, Dr. Wu had begun the careful, methodical process of examining Thomas Miller's body. External examination showed no unusual marks or signs of trauma beyond the bruising on his chest from CPR attempts. His weight was appropriate for his height, and he showed no obvious signs of chronic illness. Heart appears normal in size, Dr. Wu noted as Ray recorded her observations. No obvious enlargement or damage visible externally. As she continued the internal examination, she found mild atherosclerosis, a common finding in American adults, but nothing that should have caused sudden death. His lungs were clear, no signs of pulmonary embolism. His liver showed minimal fatty changes, common in people with slightly elevated cholesterol. Nothing jumping out at you? Ray asked after an hour of meticulous work. Dr. Wu shook her head. Not yet. Let's check the brain. The brain examination was often revealing in cases of sudden death. Strokes, aneurysms, undiagnosed tumors. The brain held many possible culprits. Dr. Wu carefully removed and examined Thomas's brain, looking for any visible abnormalities. Wait, she said, pausing over a small area near the brainstem. There's something here. Ray leaned in closer. Tumor? Maybe. Dr. Wu adjusted her magnifying lens. But it doesn't look like typical tumor tissue. It's more encapsulated, like something's walled off. She carefully extracted samples for further testing. I want comprehensive toxicology, tissue pathology, and bacterial and viral panels. Something isn't adding up here. While Dr. Wu continued her work, Miguel Ramirez was starting his shift at Memorial Hospital. He hadn't slept well, the image of Thomas Miller collapsing in the food court replaying in his mind. As a cardiac care nurse, Miguel had seen many heart attacks, but something about this case felt different. During his break, he called the medical examiner's office. This is Miguel Ramirez. I was the first responder at Pinewood Mall on Saturday. I was wondering if you had any findings on Thomas Miller's case. The receptionist was sympathetic but firm. I'm sorry, sir, but we can only release information to family members. I understand, Miguel said. It's just, professionally speaking, his symptoms were unusual. If there's anything that might help me be better prepared next time, I can pass your contact information to Dr. Wu, she offered. She sometimes consults with medical professionals when cases have educational value. Back at the Miller home, the funeral director had arrived to discuss arrangements. Lisa sat numb as he gently explained options and costs. Her brother-in-law Frank, an attorney, had come to help with the paperwork. We should wait on finalizing anything until we have the medical report, Frank suggested. Insurance companies sometimes have different requirements depending on cause of death. Lisa nodded, though the practical details felt impossibly distant from her grief. They said we'd know something today. As if on cue, the phone rang. Beth answered it, then held it out to Lisa. It's the medical examiner's office. Lisa's hand trembled as she took the phone. Hello, Mrs. Miller? This is Dr. Helen Wu. I've been examining your husband's case. Did you find out what happened to him? Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a brief pause. Mrs. Miller, I've found something unusual that requires additional testing. I'd like to request permission to conduct some specialized tests before releasing my final report. Lisa felt her stomach tighten. Unusual? What does that mean? I've identified an abnormality near your husband's brainstem, Dr. Wu explained carefully. It's not immediately clear what it is, which is why I'd like to run additional tests. This might help explain what happened. Could this thing have killed him? Lisa asked, gripping the phone tightly. It's possible. The location is significant. The brainstem controls many vital functions, including heart rate. But I don't want to speculate before we have more information. After hanging up, Lisa relayed the conversation to her family. Penny looked simultaneously horrified and relieved. Horrified that something had been growing in her father's brain, relieved that there might be an explanation for his death. Brain tumor? Beth asked quietly when Penny had gone upstairs. She didn't say that exactly, Lisa replied. Just an abnormality that needs more testing. Frank frowned. Did Thomas ever complain about headaches, vision problems, anything like that? Lisa thought back over the past few months. He mentioned headaches sometimes, and he seemed more tired than usual, but he always blamed it on work stress or not sleeping well. As evening approached, Dr. Wu was still at her lab, examining tissue samples from Thomas Miller's brain. The abnormality was unlike anything she'd seen in her 20 years of practice. It's not behaving like typical tumor cells, she told her colleague, Dr. Victor Chen, who had joined her out of curiosity. See how these cells are arranged? Almost like they're hosting something. Dr. Chen adjusted the microscope. Parasitic, maybe. Dr. Wu straightened up, considering. That's not a bad thought. But what kind of parasite targets the brainstem and remains undetected? Rare but not impossible, Dr. Chen said. Remember that case study from Brazil last year? The patient had no symptoms until seizures started. Dr. Wu began preparing slides for more specialized staining. If this is parasitic, we need to identify it quickly. There could be public health implications. The next morning, Lisa received another call from Dr. Wu. Mrs. Miller, I wonder if I could ask you some questions about your husband's recent activities. Specifically, has he traveled outside the country in the past year or two? Lisa was taken aback by the question. Yes, actually. He went to Thailand and Cambodia 6 months ago. It was a volunteer trip. His accounting firm partners with some microfinance projects there. Why? And did he get sick during or after this trip? Even mildly? Lisa thought back. He had what we thought was a bad stomach bug when he first got back. Lasted about a week. After that, he seemed fine. Dr. Wu made notes as Lisa spoke. And the headaches you mentioned, when did those start? I'm not sure exactly. Maybe 2 months ago? They were never bad enough to keep him home from work. Just annoying, he said. After gathering more details about Thomas's recent history, Dr. Wu thanked Lisa and promised to call as soon as she had conclusive findings. Meanwhile, Miguel Ramirez was surprised to receive a call from the medical examiner's office during his lunch break. Mr. Ramirez, this is Dr. Helen Wu. I understand you were the first responder who performed CPR on Thomas Miller at the mall. That's right, Miguel confirmed. I'm a cardiac care nurse at Memorial. I wonder if you could tell me exactly what you observed before he collapsed. Any symptoms or behaviors that seemed unusual? Miguel described Thomas's grayish complexion, the way he had gripped the table, and how quickly he had deteriorated. It didn't present like a typical heart attack. There was something neurological happening too. His eyes weren't tracking right before he went down. Thank you, Dr. Wu said. That's very helpful. Would you be willing to review my findings once they're complete? Your observations could provide valuable clinical context. By Wednesday afternoon, Dr. Wu had assembled a small team of specialists to review the case, including a tropical disease expert and a neuropathologist. The preliminary findings were startling enough that she had fast-tracked the more specialized tests. The tissue samples show clear evidence of a parasitic infection, she explained to her colleagues. But it's not behaving like any known neurocysticercosis or other common brain parasites. It appears to have formed a symbiotic relationship with surrounding tissue, creating a hybrid structure that was pressing against critical areas of the brainstem. The tropical disease specialist Dr. Patel shook his head in amazement. And this was completely asymptomatic until it caused cardiac arrest? Not completely asymptomatic, Dr. Wu corrected. The family reports headaches, fatigue, and occasional disorientation in the months leading up to death. But nothing severe enough to seek medical attention. We need to identify this organism, Dr. Patel said. If it's something new or emerging from Southeast Asia, there could be others at risk. Dr. Wu nodded. I've already contacted the CDC. They're sending a specialist tomorrow. As the medical team worked to unravel the mystery, Lisa Miller sat in her living room surrounded by photo albums. Penny had asked to see pictures of her dad from before she was born, and they had spent the evening telling stories and crying together. In one photo, Thomas stood grinning beside a completed Habitat for Humanity house. In another, he was teaching a 5-year-old Penny to ride a bike. He was always helping people, Lisa said softly. Even this accounting trip to Cambodia, he was so excited to teach bookkeeping skills to small business owners. Little did she know that this compassionate act may have been what led to the mysterious condition that would soon shock the medical community. Thursday morning brought a flurry of activity to the county medical center's laboratory. Dr. Amanda Torres from the Centers for Disease Control had arrived on the overnight flight, her expertise in emerging infectious diseases making her the perfect consultant for Thomas Miller's puzzling case. "Thanks for coming so quickly," Dr. Wu said, leading Dr. Torres to the lab where slides and samples were meticulously arranged. "Your preliminary findings were compelling enough to bump this to priority status," Dr. Torres replied, setting down her bag. "A potentially new parasitic organism that targets the brainstem? That's not something we take lightly." As Dr. Torres settled in to examine the samples, across town Lisa Miller was facing a difficult conversation with the funeral director. "I understand your frustration, Mrs. Miller," he said gently, "but without a death certificate listing cause of death, we can't proceed with certain arrangements." Lisa rubbed her temples, fighting a headache brought on by stress and lack of sleep. "They said it could be several more days. The CDC is involved now." Beth placed a supportive hand on her sister's shoulder. "Is there anything we can do in the meantime?" The funeral director nodded sympathetically. "We can handle all the preparations that don't require the death certificate. The memorial service planning, obituary. Those things can move forward." After he left, Lisa stared out the window at the neighbor kids riding bikes in the street. Just last month, Thomas had been out there helping 10-year-old Joey from next door fix his chain. "What am I supposed to tell people?" Lisa asked quietly. "Everyone keeps asking what happened, and I have no answer except that some doctor found something strange in his brain." Beth sat beside her. "You tell them the truth, that Thomas's case is helping doctors understand something important, something that might help other people someday." At the medical center, Dr. Torres was peering through an electron microscope at tissue samples from Thomas's brain. Her expression shifted from professional curiosity to astonishment. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, making notes as she adjusted the magnification. "The organism has characteristics of several known parasites, but its structure and behavior are unlike anything in our database." Dr. Wu leaned in. "That's what puzzled me. It's almost as if it evolved specifically to integrate with human neural tissue. The location is what makes this so dangerous," Dr. Torres added. "Most brain parasites affect the cerebrum or cerebellum. Ones that target the brainstem are exceedingly rare, precisely because they're so often fatal." Dr. Patel, who had been analyzing blood samples, joined them with his own findings. "There's something else. The blood work shows elevated levels of a compound similar to dopamine, but with a slightly altered molecular structure." Dr. Torres looked up sharply. "The parasite was producing neurotransmitters?" "It appears so," Dr. Patel confirmed, "which might explain why Miller didn't experience more severe symptoms. The parasite may have been compensating for the disruption it was causing." Dr. Wu sat back in her chair, processing the implications. So it was keeping him functional while it grew, until it reached a critical point where it couldn't compensate anymore. "Precisely," Dr. Torres said. "And that makes it both fascinating and terrifying from a public health perspective. How many others might be infected but asymptomatic because the parasite is effectively hiding itself?" Miguel Ramirez arrived at the lab later that afternoon, having been invited by Dr. Wu to review their findings. As a frontline healthcare worker, his observations could be valuable for identifying future cases. "The symptoms you described seeing before he collapsed now make perfect sense," Dr. Wu explained, showing Miguel the brain imaging scans. The parasite had grown to a size where it was intermittently pressing on his vagus nerve, which controls heart rate. Miguel studied the images with professional interest that couldn't quite mask his horror. "And he might have had no idea anything was wrong? Beyond some headaches? That's what makes this case so significant," Dr. Torres said. "The organism seems to have evolved to avoid detection. It even produces compounds that mimic normal neurotransmitters to prevent obvious symptoms. Like the perfect houseguest," Miguel said grimly. "Doesn't make a mess, doesn't make noise, until suddenly it kills you. By Friday morning, The team had prepared a preliminary report detailed enough to provide Lisa Miller with answers while alerting health authorities to the potential threat. Dr. Wu called Lisa to invite her to the medical center. Would it be all right if I bring my daughter? Lisa asked. She's 17 and she was there when it happened. I think she needs to understand too. Dr. Wu agreed, and that afternoon, Lisa and Penny sat in a small conference room as Dr. Wu and Dr. Torres gently explained their findings. We've discovered that Thomas had a parasitic infection in his brain, Dr. Wu began, choosing her words carefully. It's an organism that we believe he contracted during his trip to Southeast Asia 6 months ago. Lisa clutched Penny's hand. From the food? The water? Dr. Torres shook her head. We're not entirely sure yet. It could have been food, water, or even an insect bite. What makes this organism unusual is how it behaved once inside Thomas's body. Using simplified diagrams, they explained how the parasite had made its way to Thomas's brainstem and formed what they were calling a symbiotic structure, part parasite, part human tissue, that had grown slowly over months. The reason Thomas didn't experience severe symptoms is actually part of what makes this organism so dangerous, Dr. Wu explained. It produces chemicals similar to the ones our brains naturally make, which mask the disruption it was causing. Penny, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. So it was like tricking his body into thinking everything was normal? Dr. Torres nodded, impressed by the teenager's quick understanding. Exactly. Until it grew too large and the balance tipped. Could it have been treated? Lisa asked, her voice breaking. If we had known, could doctors have saved him? The doctors exchanged glances. If it had been detected early, yes, there are anti-parasitic medications that likely would have been effective, Dr. Wu said gently. But the challenge is that it doesn't cause obvious symptoms that would lead someone to seek medical care. That's why your husband's case is so important, Dr. Torres added. It's helping us identify this threat and develop screening protocols that could save others. After Lisa and Penny left, the medical team continued their work with renewed urgency. By Saturday evening, 1 week after Thomas's collapse at the mall, they had confirmed several key findings. First, the parasite appeared to be a previously unknown species, which they temporarily designated as Neurocystic Urca occultus, hidden nerve parasite. Second, it seemed to enter the body through the digestive system, likely from contaminated food or water, before migrating to the central nervous system. Third, and most concerning, its ability to produce human-like neurotransmitters suggested an alarming level of co-evolution with human hosts. We need to alert healthcare providers in areas with returning travelers from Southeast Asia, Dr. Torres said as they prepared their official report, especially in regions near the Cambodia-Thailand border where Miller was working. Dr. Wu nodded, reviewing the death certificate before signing it. Cause of death: cardiac arrest due to brainstem compression from parasitic encapsulation. Will his family get some closure from this at least? Dr. Patel asked. I hope so, Dr. Wu replied. At minimum, they know it wasn't something they could have prevented or detected. On Sunday morning, as church bells rang across the city, Miguel Ramirez sat with his son Diego at their kitchen table. Remember that man at the mall? Miguel asked gently. Diego nodded, the memory still troubling him. Did they find out why he died? They did, Miguel said. He had picked up a tiny parasite, kind of like a bug so small you can't see it, during his travels. He was in Cambodia helping people learn business skills. So he was doing something good when he got sick? Diego asked. Yes, Miguel confirmed. He was helping others. And now, because of what doctors learned from his case, they might be able to help many more people. Diego considered this. So even though he died, he's still helping people? Miguel smiled sadly. That's right. Sometimes that's how medical breakthroughs happen. Someone's tragedy becomes a gift to others. Across town, Lisa and Penny Miller were finally planning Thomas's memorial service, now scheduled for the following weekend. The autopsy report had provided answers, allowing them to move forward with the practical aspects of their grief. Dad would have thought it was kind of cool, Penny said as they sorted through photos for a memorial display. Being part of a medical discovery, I mean. Lisa smiled through tears. He would have made jokes about being famous in medical journals. Do you think they'll name the parasite after him? Penny asked. I hope not. Lisa said with a small laugh, the first since Thomas's death. Your father would hate having a parasite as his legacy, but Thomas Miller's legacy would prove to be something far more meaningful than his name on a parasite. Even as his family prepared to say goodbye, doctors around the world were receiving the first alerts about the newly discovered threat, alerts that would soon lead to screening protocols, treatment guidelines, and diagnostic tools that would save countless lives. And in a remote village in Cambodia, local health workers were already beginning to investigate an unusual pattern of mild neurological symptoms among residents. Symptoms that, thanks to Thomas Miller's case, would no longer go unrecognized until it was too late. 2 weeks after Thomas Miller collapsed at Pinewood Mall, his memorial service took place at the community center, where he had volunteered as a tax preparer for low-income families. The room overflowed with friends, colleagues, and neighbors, many standing along the walls when the seats filled up. Lisa and Penny greeted mourners beside a photo display showing Thomas throughout his life, as a grinning toddler on a tricycle, a serious teenager in a debate club photo, a proud husband on his wedding day, and a beaming father holding newborn Penny. The final photo showed Thomas surrounded by smiling Cambodian villagers outside a small cinder-block building. That was from his volunteer trip, Lisa explained to an elderly couple studying the picture. He helped set up accounting systems for their microloan program. Such important work, the woman said, squeezing Lisa's hand. You must be so proud of him. Lisa nodded, finding comfort in this acknowledgement of Thomas's character. As difficult as the past 2 weeks had been, learning about the parasite that took her husband's life had given her something concrete to grasp onto amid the swirling chaos of grief. Dr. Helen Wu sat quietly in the back row. She rarely attended memorial services for her patients. It risked blurring professional boundaries. But Thomas Miller's case had affected her deeply, not just professionally as a medical mystery solved, but personally as well. His death had already begun saving lives. After the service, as guests shared memories over coffee and sandwiches, Dr. Wu approached Lisa. Mrs. Miller, I hope I'm not intruding, she said quietly. Lisa recognized her immediately. Dr. Wu, no, you're not intruding at all. I'm glad you came. I wanted to let you know that the CDC has issued an official health alert based on your husband's case, Dr. Wu said. All healthcare providers are being notified about the symptoms to watch for, especially in patients who've traveled to Southeast Asia. Penny joined them, balancing 2 plates of food that she'd barely touched. Have they found any other cases yet? 3 potential cases have been identified in returned travelers, Dr. Wu confirmed. All are responding well to antiparasitic treatment. Because of what we learned from your father, doctors knew what to look for before these infections became dangerous. Penny's eyes filled with tears. So he's already helped save people? Yes, Dr. Wu said simply. He has. As the memorial gathering continued, Miguel Ramirez and his son Diego arrived. Miguel had felt a connection to this family since that terrible day at the mall, and his hospital had been among the first to implement the new screening protocols for the parasite. Mrs. Miller, Miguel said, introducing himself. I was the nurse who tried to save Thomas, Lisa finished for him. Yes, I remember you. Please call me Lisa. Diego looked up at Penny. My dad says your dad was helping people in Cambodia when he got sick, and now he's still helping people even though he died. The adults fell silent, but Penny knelt to Diego's level. That's right. That's exactly right. Later that evening, after the last guests had gone and the community center had been cleaned up, Lisa, Penny, and Beth sat in the living room of the Miller home, emotionally exhausted. Dr. Wu said something interesting before she left, Lisa said, curled up in what had been Thomas's favorite armchair. She said they're putting together a research team to study this parasite, and they want to include Thomas's name in their grant application. The Thomas Miller Initiative for Parasitic Brainstem Research. Dad would hate that name, Penny said with a tired laugh. So wordy and serious? I told her the same thing, Lisa smiled. She said they could use the Miller Project instead. Beth brought in mugs of tea. Speaking of projects, did you decide what to do about Thomas's Cambodia program? His firm called again today. Lisa sipped her tea thoughtfully. They want to send someone else to continue his work. They asked if I'd object to them creating a memorial fund in his name to expand the program. What did you tell them? Beth asked. I said yes, Lisa replied quietly. But I also asked them to work with health officials to include parasite screening and prevention education in the program. If they're going to use Thomas's name, they need to address the full reality of his experience there. Meanwhile, across the world in a rural health clinic in Cambodia, Dr. Vivian Lee from the World Health Organization was examining a young farmer named Soka. 3 days earlier, the clinic had received an urgent alert about a newly identified parasitic infection, first discovered in an American who had visited the region. "You've had these headaches for how long?" Dr. Lee asked through a translator. "Maybe 3 months," Soka replied. "Not too bad. Just here," he pointed to the base of his skull, exactly where Thomas Miller's parasite had been located. Dr. Lee ordered blood tests and a portable ultrasound of Soka's brainstem, new equipment that had arrived with the WHO team. Within hours, they had confirmation. A small parasitic cyst almost identical to Thomas Miller's but caught much earlier. "We can treat this," Dr. Lee assured the worried man. "You'll need to take medicine for several weeks, but the infection should clear completely." As Soka left with his medication, Dr. Lee updated her case log. Soka was the 7th villager they diagnosed in 2 days. All had mild symptoms that might have gone overlooked for months or years without the new awareness. The next morning, Lisa Miller returned to work at the elementary school where she taught 3rd grade. Her colleagues had been supportive, covering her classes and giving her space to grieve, but Lisa needed the comfort of routine and the distraction of 28 energetic 8-year-olds. "Mrs. Miller is back," shouted Zoe, the first student to spot her in the hallway. The children surrounded her, offering handmade cards and carefully rehearsed condolences that came out in a jumble of "sorry your husband" and "we missed you" and "my goldfish died too." Lisa found herself smiling genuinely, for the first time in weeks. "Thank you all. I missed you too." Her classroom had been decorated with a welcome back banner, and her desk held a vase of fresh flowers from the teaching staff. On her chair was a scrapbook filled with messages and drawings from her students. "We did a science lesson about doctors who solve mysteries," explained Mr. Phillip, the teaching assistant who had covered her class. "The kids were fascinated by the idea that doctors had to be detectives to figure out what happened to your husband." Lisa flipped through the scrapbook, touching the carefully drawn pictures of doctors with magnifying glasses and microscopes. 8-year-old logic had simplified the complex medical investigation into something understandable, a mystery solved by heroes in lab coats. "This is wonderful," she said, wiping away tears. Thomas would have loved it. That afternoon, Dr. Wu was presenting Thomas Miller's case to a packed auditorium of medical professionals. The slides behind her showed microscopic images of the parasite, brain scans, and chemical analyses. "What makes this organism unique," she explained, "is its remarkable ability to mimic human neurotransmitters, effectively hiding itself from both the immune system and clinical detection until it reaches a critical size." A doctor in the front row raised his hand. "Has there been any progress identifying the source? Food? Water? Insect vector?" "The CDC team in Cambodia has narrowed it down to a waterborne transmission," Dr. Wu replied. "They've found evidence of the organism in certain untreated water sources near where Mr. Miller was working. Local authorities are implementing filtration systems and education programs." After the presentation, Dr. Wu checked her phone to find a text message from Miguel Ramirez. "Possible case identified in ER. 41-year male, returned from Thailand 4 months ago. Complaining of occipital headaches and fatigue. Mentioned your protocol to attending physician." Dr. Wu typed back quickly. "On my way." 6 months after Thomas Miller's death, Lisa and Penny stood in the sunshine outside a new building in Cambodia. A simple plaque beside the door read, "The Miller Center for Microfinance and Community Health." They had used Thomas's life insurance money to travel here, to see firsthand the place he had cared about and, unknowingly, brought home with him in the worst possible way. "It's smaller than I imagined," Penny said, looking at the modest cinder block structure with its metal roof. "But look how many people are inside," Lisa replied, watching through the open door as local residents gathered for a workshop. Part financial training, part health education, the center now served dual purposes, continuing Thomas's financial literacy mission while preventing others from suffering his fate. Dr. Vivian Lee greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Miller, Miss Miller, welcome to Kampong Cham. Your husband's legacy has made an enormous difference here." She led them on a tour of the village, showing them the new water filtration system and introducing them to Soka and other villagers who had been successfully treated for early-stage infections. We've identified 37 cases in this province alone, Dr. Lee explained. All are recovering well, and the education program has reached over 50 villages. That evening, as Lisa and Penny sat on the porch of their guest house watching the sunset over distant rice fields, Penny took her mother's hand. I used to think that how you die defines your life, she said thoughtfully. Like, if you die climbing a mountain, you're adventurous. If you die saving someone, you're a hero. Lisa looked at her daughter, struck by how much she'd matured in these difficult months. And now I think it's what happens after you die that matters most, Penny said. Dad died in a mall food court eating Chinese food. That could have been meaningless. But look at everything that's happened since. All the people who are alive because doctors figured out what happened to him. Lisa squeezed her daughter's hand, watching the sky turn brilliant orange and pink. Your father always wanted his work to matter, she said softly. I think he'd be at peace knowing it does. Back in the United States, in a laboratory at the CDC, Dr. Amanda Torres carefully labeled a new vaccine sample, No MV1, Neurocystic Urca occultus Miller vaccine, first version. If successful, it would provide protection for aid workers, travelers, and eventually local populations in affected regions. Thomas Miller, accountant, husband, father, and accidental medical pioneer, had set in motion a chain of discovery and healing that would continue long after his name was forgotten by all but those who loved him. His legacy lived not in the name of a parasite or a building, but in every life saved by what his death had taught the world. 5 years had passed since Thomas Miller collapsed in the Pinewood Mall food court. On a crisp autumn morning, Lisa Miller stood at the podium in a university lecture hall, facing a room full of medical students. My name is Lisa Miller, she began, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. 5 years ago, my husband Thomas died suddenly while we were shopping at the mall. What doctors discovered during his autopsy changed medical understanding of parasitic infections and has since saved over 3,000 lives worldwide. This was Lisa's 15th time giving this talk as part of the medical school's guest lecture series on breakthrough cases, but the significance of sharing Thomas's story never diminished. From her seat in the front row, 22-year-old Penny gave her mother an encouraging smile. Thomas was an accountant, Lisa continued, clicking to a photo of her late husband grinning beside a completed Habitat for Humanity house. He believed in using his skills to help others. That's what took him to Cambodia on the volunteer trip where he unknowingly contracted the parasite that would eventually take his life. The students listened intently as Lisa recounted the events of that Saturday at the mall, the confusing days that followed, and Dr. Wu's groundbreaking discovery. Medical education had changed significantly since then. Now all students learned about what had become known as Miller's parasitic encephalopathy, or MPE. The reason I share this story, Lisa said, approaching the end of her presentation, isn't just to put a human face on a case study you'll read about in your textbooks. It's to remind you that behind every medical mystery is a family whose world has been turned upside down, and sometimes the answers you find don't just solve a case, they can change the world. After a thoughtful Q&A session, Lisa and Penny walked across the campus together, autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. You get better at this every time. Mom? Penny said, linking her arm through her mother's. It gets easier, Lisa admitted, especially knowing how many students will carry Thomas's story into their medical careers. Penny, now a senior pre-med student at the same university, had been forever changed by her father's death and the medical investigation that followed. What had begun as a tragedy had gradually shaped her future. Dr. Wu's coming to dinner tonight, right? Penny asked as they reached Lisa's car. Yes, and Dr. Torres is in town for the conference too. They'll both be there. Across town, Dr. Helen Wu was finishing her morning rounds at the hospital. Now the head of the Department of Pathology, she had built her career on the foundation of the Miller case, becoming a leading expert in parasitic infections of the central nervous system. Dr. Wu called a resident, hurrying to catch up with her in the hallway. The test results came back on the patient from Nigeria. You were right. It's a variant of MPE. Dr. Wu reviewed the file with practiced efficiency. Good catch. Start him on the standard protocol, but let's monitor for resistance. The African variants sometimes need adjusted dosing. In the 5 years since Thomas Miller's death, the parasite had been identified in 27 countries across Southeast Asia and parts of Africa. What had begun as a single mysterious case had revealed a previously unrecognized global health concern, one that now had standardized detection protocols, treatment regimens, and prevention strategies. Later that evening, the Miller home filled with the warm aromas of a celebratory dinner. Lisa had invited key members of the original medical team, along with Miguel Ramirez, whose quick action at the mall had given them precious minutes with Thomas before he died. "I can't believe how grown up you are," Miguel said to Penny as she took his coat. His son Diego, now 13, stood shyly behind him. "Pre-med," Penny confirmed with a smile. "With a focus on tropical medicine, of course." Dr. Amanda Torres arrived next, bringing news from the CDC. "The Miller vaccine trials are showing 94% efficacy," she announced as she hugged Lisa. "Global distribution should begin next year." Lisa felt a swell of emotion. Thomas would be amazed by all this. Dr. Wu was the last to arrive, bringing a bottle of champagne and a manila envelope. "For the milestone," she explained, handing the envelope to Lisa. Inside was the final published report on the 5-year Global MPE Initiative, a comprehensive document detailing everything learned since that first case. On the acknowledgments page, Thomas Miller's name appeared first, recognized as Patient Zero, whose case illuminated a previously unknown threat to global health. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily between personal updates and professional developments. Diego proudly told everyone about following in his father's footsteps by joining a junior lifeguard program. Miguel had been promoted to nursing director of emergency services, where he had implemented protocols that had identified dozens of early MPE cases. "Remember that first autopsy?" Dr. Wu asked Dr. Torres, refilling her wine glass. "When we realized we were looking at something entirely new, I canceled my flight back and stayed for 2 weeks," Dr. Torres laughed. "My boss thought I was overreacting until we confirmed the second and third cases." As dessert was served, Lisa tapped her glass for attention. "I want to thank all of you," she said, looking around the table. "Not just for coming tonight, but for everything you've done since Thomas died. You turned our family tragedy into something meaningful." Penny raised her glass. "To Dad," she said simply. "To Thomas," the others echoed. After dinner, as the guests moved to the living room for coffee, Lisa noticed Diego looking at the family photos on the mantel, particularly one of Thomas and Penny at a father-daughter dance when she was 12. "That was the year before he died," Lisa said gently, joining the boy. Diego nodded solemnly. "My dad told me he thinks about your husband a lot. Like whenever he's checking patients, he asks himself if it could be something nobody's thinking about. That's a wonderful way to honor him," Lisa said, touched by the ongoing ripple effects of Thomas's case. Later, after the guests had gone and Penny had returned to her campus apartment, Lisa sat alone in the quiet house. 5 years had softened the sharp edges of grief, leaving behind something gentler, a melancholy gratitude for the unexpected legacy that had emerged from loss. Her phone pinged with a message from Dr. Wu. "Forgot to mention, the WHO team in Cambodia sent this today." Attached was a photo of a rural classroom where a health worker was teaching children about safe water practices. On the wall behind her hung a simple poster showing a cartoon water filter with the words, "The Miller Method," in both English and Khmer. Lisa smiled through sudden tears. Thomas's name lived on in ways she could never have imagined. The next morning, Lisa drove to Pinewood Mall for the first time in nearly 2 years. She had avoided it initially, the memories too painful, but gradually had returned for occasional shopping trips. Today, however, she had a specific purpose. The food court had been remodeled since that day 5 years ago, with brighter lighting and new seating areas, but the central space remained similar. Lisa found a table near where it had happened and sat down, placing the small potted plant she had brought on the table. A young security guard approached her curiously. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Lisa nodded. "Yes, thank you. My husband died here 5 years ago today. I just wanted to sit for a moment." The guard's expression changed to one of recognition. "Wait, was that the case that led to the discovery of that brain parasite? They taught us about it in first responder training." Yes, Lisa said, surprised. That was my husband, Thomas. Ma'am, that case saved my uncle's life, the guard said earnestly. He had just come back from Thailand when they started screening travelers. Found the parasite early, got it treated. Doctor told him he was lucky they knew what to look for now. Lisa felt the familiar mixture of grief and pride that had become the emotional signature of her loss. Thank you for telling me that. After the guard moved on, Lisa sat quietly watching the ordinary rhythm of the food court. Families eating together, teenagers laughing, elderly couples sharing meals. Life continuing in all its mundane beauty. Her phone buzzed with a text from Penny. Thinking of Dad today. Love you, Mom. Lisa texted back a heart emoji, then gathered her things to leave. As she stood, she noticed a middle-aged man at a nearby table suddenly grasp his chest, his face contorting in pain. Without hesitation, Lisa rushed over. Sir, are you all right? The man tried to speak but couldn't. His companion looked panicked. I'm calling 911, Lisa said calmly, pulling out her phone. To the companion she asked, has he had heart problems before? No, but he's been having headaches, the woman replied anxiously. He just got back from a business trip to Thailand 2 weeks ago. Lisa's heart skipped. She caught the eye of the security guard who was already moving toward them. Tell the paramedics to consider MPE protocol, she said firmly as she dialed. Within minutes, the mall's medical response team arrived, followed shortly by paramedics. Lisa shared her observations, including the Thailand connection, and was relieved when the lead paramedic immediately recognized the possibility. We'll run the rapid test in the ambulance, he assured her. If it's positive, we can start treatment immediately. As they wheeled the man away, his companion clutched Lisa's hand. Thank you. How did you know to mention that parasite thing? Lisa smiled sadly. It's a long story, but I believe your friend will be fine now. Walking back to her car, Lisa felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected to find today. 5 years ago, in this very building, she had lost her husband to an unknown threat. Today, that knowledge might have just saved someone else. Thomas's death had created a strange kind of immortality. Not the kind anyone would choose, but meaningful nonetheless. His name attached to medical protocols, his case studied by students, his story changing how doctors approached unexplained symptoms. The small moments of an ordinary life, ended too soon in a mall food court, had rippled outward to touch thousands of lives across the world. Thomas Miller, husband, father, accountant, unwitting medical pioneer, lived on not just in memories, but in every person who now survived what he could not. Lisa started her car and headed home, thinking about what she would cook for Penny's visit this weekend, and how proud Thomas would be of the woman their daughter had become. Life moved forward, carrying Thomas's legacy with it, one saved life at a time.